You're listening to Thunder Quack Podcast Network.
Hi, my name is John Byrne, and you're listening to the Epic Marvel Podcast.
Welcome back to another episode of the Epic Marvel Podcast. I'm your host, Kurtis Findlay. With me today is my Fantastic Four host. He's going to be with me together for all of these Fantastic Four episodes. This is Eric Findlay.
Hello.
And he is actually my brother, and a lot of people say that we sound the same, especially over the phone, so we're hoping that you'll be able to tell us apart.
So this is Eric's voice.
And this is Curtis's voice. We'll see if this is confusing. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about Fantastic Four, the Epic Collection, Volume 17, All in the Family, which is 1986 to 1987, which covers Fantastic Four number 296 to 307, plus Annual 20, and the miniseries Fantastic Four versus X-Men numbers 1 to 4. I had the opportunity to talk to both John Bogdanove, who did the art for the miniseries, and Steve Englehart, who's the writer for the last 7 or 8 issues of this epic collection. And there are some really interesting things to hear, and I will splice in some of the clips from those interviews throughout this episode. But if you want to hear the full thing, I've put them up on our Patreon site. So our supporters, whom I'm dubbing the Epic Marvel Marching Society, will have access to hear these first, because we really appreciate your support. And then eventually down the road, I'll be releasing them as regular episodes. There are a few episodes up there, like stuff from Ron Friends and Tom DeFalco, and I'll be posting new stuff up there all the time. You can head over to patreon.com/thunderquack to become a supporter and help us with our keeping this podcast up and running. Okay, Eric, about this Fantastic Four Volume 17, this is an interesting period for the Fantastic Four.
Yeah. When I first started reading this, I thought this is in the middle of like one of the high times of the Fantastic Four. There's probably not much that you really need to know going into this. And then as I started reading, I realized there's a lot that you need to know going into this.
Yeah, and for a lot of it, they do a good job of explaining it within the first few issues. But yeah, I think one of the biggest things is that the Thing returns to the Fantastic Four in the first issue in this book. Where has he been all this time?
Right. What happens is that back in 1984, which is 2 years before this starts, in the Thing number 10, 3 of the members of the Fantastic Four are swept away to Battleworld to compete in the Beyonders' secret war. And when they return, the Thing doesn't come with them. He decides that he wants to remain on Battleworld because on Battleworld he has the ability to change back and forth between Ben Grimm and the Thing. What he doesn't realize is that Reed Richards has recently discovered that he has the ability to change back and forth whenever he wants, but actually it's his relationship to Alicia that's causing him to basically mentally keep himself in the Thing state. So he's actually in Battleworld in the Thing ongoing series for about a year, and it's only when he at the end of that run that toward the end of that run that he comes back to Earth, only to find out that he's been replaced by She-Hulk.
Right, and during that time he does a little stint as a pro wrestler, which is where he meets Sharon Ventura, and that comes into play later on in this volume as well. We'll talk about that. And yeah, this is immediately following the John Byrne run, one of the most acclaimed runs, probably next to Stan and Jack's run themselves. John Byrne's run is one of the highest points in Fantastic Four history. And so this is the period right after that. John Byrne had been having some, political behind-the-scenes issues and got offered the chance to reboot Superman, which, are you going to say no to that? Probably not.
No, I wouldn't.
So he leaves, and we get this sort of interim period, which is what most of this volume is. We get Roger Stern taking up the writing chores, with a couple issues by Tom DeFalco in there, I think, as well, before it actually settles in to its new writer, Steve Englehart. Franklin was born recently.
Yeah. No, not Franklin has been born recently. Recently, Sue was pregnant with their second child.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
And
that's why she didn't go to Battle World.
Right, exactly, because she was pregnant. And the interesting thing is that all of this stuff sort of happens about 2 years before this collection, but in comic book time, it's actually very recent.
Right.
So Reed and Sue were pregnant, but they lost their baby in Fantastic Four 267. At the time, they were living in Bellport, Connecticut, because they wanted to be away from all of the craziness of the superhero life while she was pregnant. But then, with the loss of the baby, they came back probably about a year and a half before this the first issue in this volume came out.
Right. And the reason I brought up Franklin earlier is because his powers are developing through this book, and most of that is actually explored in Power Pack. When and if you listen to my interview with John Bogdanove, we actually talk a lot about Power Pack. Mm-hmm. Which, if you haven't read Power Pack, I actually recommend it. I binged a lot of it in order to prepare myself for this interview, and it was quite excellent.
I actually haven't read as much as I would like to. I've read a little bit of it, but a lot of those sort of C, D, E list characters from the 80s. I really like them, but I haven't actually read that much of the Power Pack.
I recommend checking it out, especially the first, 25 or so issues are really great. And it just builds to this like really epic space battle. But anyway, we're going on a tangent here. If there's ever Power Pack Epic Collections, then we can talk about that series in more detail.
Yeah. Speaking of Franklin and Power Pack, you say that his powers are starting to develop, and that's actually not really the case. But I'll talk about that more when we get to that issue.
Okay. The other thing that I think is important to know is that Mutant Massacre, the storyline in the X-Men just happened.
Yeah.
Just before this volume came out as well. So there's some implications there that we can talk about when those. That was when the Morlocks kind of got massacred in the underground tunnels of New York
by the Reavers.
Yeah,
and that's where Archangel loses wings and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
One thing that I think it's important to mention as we go into this is if you haven't read Fantastic Four before, it's a very different kind of title than a lot of your other typical comic books. The Fantastic Four are not like the X-Men, where they try to bring to light the issues of prejudice and difference and hatred and that kind of stuff. Or it's not like the Avengers, where you're fighting the huge battles for the world and that kind of stuff. The Fantastic Four is focused on relationships primarily. It's about the interaction of good friends and family and how it's not always perfect. In addition to that, there's the theme of scientific exploration and discovery and adventure. But it's not actually about fighting the bad guy or having a giant battle.
Although those certainly happen.
Oh, yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
I think Fantastic Four defined the epic battle, because one of the first epic battles, epic space battles in Marvel history is when Galactus came to town.
Yeah.
In Fantastic Four 48, 49, 50.
But interestingly enough, though, as much as you say it's an epic battle, they didn't really fight him that much.
True.
Because they couldn't.
Right.
And they had to have some other way of defeating him.
I guess I just mean the idea of
the scope.
The scope of the larger cosmic universe.
Right.
Really came out of Fantastic Four.
That's right.
What did you think about this epic collection in general, in terms of the the physical book, the restoration, the packaging, the way it all fits together?
I've always been a big fan of the pre-computer coloring.
Yeah, the four-color
The
coloring.
four-color coloring, yeah. I liked it. But the recoloring that they've done in this is really good.
Yeah.
There was one mistake that I noticed where She-Hulk's coat is colored blue like her costume instead of brown when she's ripping it off. And I don't know if that's something they've intentionally maintained from the original.
Yeah, sometimes they do that. If there are coloring errors in the original, they'll keep the coloring errors in the restoration because that's how readers experienced it. Sometimes they change them, but
I think that's kind of neat, actually.
yeah.
Yeah, and also they include at the very end a selection of Marvel Age number 48.
Yeah.
And it has some Fred Hembeck comics, which I think are really funny. And then what is that big written section at the end?
It's just an article. I think
the
it's from
article they have.
Marvel Age as well.
Yeah, it is. The whole part is from Marvel Age. But yeah, the article that's written there. It's neat because in the previous versions of these reprint collections, they wouldn't put these things in.
Right.
And they would otherwise be lost in time. So it's neat that they kind of say, we can throw a couple more pages in here, and this is something that otherwise wouldn't really get reprinted.
Yeah, and it's for the people who are listening to this podcast, because you're listening to this podcast because you want to dive deeper into these issues and hear what people have to say. Well, these articles that they're sticking at the very end are for these exact people. You get to hear from the creators and that kind of thing. There's also a house ad for the new Fantastic Four where Ben has sent a group shot to Victor Von Doom saying, hey, guess who's in charge now?
Those pinups are always really neat.
They're great. And then there's also an introduction from Ann Nocenti, who was an editor. She wasn't editor of these books, but she was an editor for Marvel at the time. She did an introduction to an old Fantastic Four versus the X-Men trade paperback. Actually, Ann Nocenti was the editor for the miniseries. Sorry, that was my mistake there. There's also a few pages of original uncolored art, scanned from the original art from John Buscema. So that's kind of cool to see, as well as, just some pictures from various trade paperbacks and the Essentials collections and that kind of stuff. So yeah, a nice set of features. We have some listener comments, and so I'm going to read them. On the Marvel Masterworks forum, Drubo says, I haven't read All in the Family since it came out, so forgive me if my memory is a little spotty. I remember liking issue 299, right before the wedding, with the She-Hulk and Thing fighting, and Ben agreeing to be the best man in the end. Yep, I thought that was a good issue, too.
Yes.
We'll get into that. I also remember Franklin being in peril what seemed like every issue, but maybe that was just me.
Yeah.
That's actually, it happens once, I think, but in this issue, in this volume, at least, because Franklin's kind of taken out of the picture pretty quick into it, and he actually saves the day a few times.
A few times, yeah. Most of the time when he's there, he's not actually in danger because of his he's in his sort of ghost form.
Right. Over on Facebook, James left a comment and said, I didn't hate this volume, but a lot of it felt like treading water, and I didn't like a few takes on the characters. Johnny marrying Alicia and Ben having to man up and deal with it never sat well with me. Quicksilver is an outright villain here, and I hated that too. The Versus X-Men series is a lot of fun, though, and I wish Claremont wrote more FF. I admit I haven't read much of his 2000 run. That's the post-Heroes Reborn run.
Right.
Overall, this was probably the most forgettable epic I've read so far. And I think that there's a lot to be said on that because, yes, this could possibly be the most forgettable epic because it is a transitional period. There are so many different creators involved. You don't get that overarching consistency throughout this one epic.
And what does he say at the beginning about it?
He says, I didn't hate this volume, but a lot of it felt like treading water.
Right, and that's inevitably what you experience when you go through a big change like this.
Yeah.
Is, well, we got to keep it going until we sort of find our new footing.
And Roger Stern was just the temporary guy doing kind of fill-in after fill-in issue until they found the regular replacement. So it kind of is treading water.
But yeah, about his Quicksilver comment, though, I actually kind of disagree with it. Yes, he's the villain of the comic, but there's a very well thought out reason for it. It's not like he's the hero everywhere else and he just decides to come over here and be the villain. I mean, maybe we should talk about it more when we get to that comic, but
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can address that. I got a message through Facebook from Adam, and he says, about FF 305, how did you feel about how Englehart portrayed Ben once he finally became the leader of FF? Did you feel it was true to his character historically? Did you like this bolder rendition of the character? Both before and after, he's not usually written as someone who wants or desires leadership. Heck, in 304, it shows him hesitant, and then the next issue it feels like he's swinging all the way to the other side.
that's a very good comment. It's not something I really thought about much when I was reading this.
One of the earliest things in Fantastic Four, if you go way back to like the first 10 issues or so, is that Ben does sometimes say that he thinks that he should be leader of the Fantastic Four. Like it's something, and I think Steve Englehart, when he prepared for this, he went all the way back to the very beginning in order to get a grasp on these characters.
Yeah, it shows
and
that he
stuff.
really understands these characters.
And I think the desire for leadership comes out of those early issues. I think that when initially approached to be the leader, Ben is a little hesitant. But of course, I think anybody would probably be like, he's all talk until he's like, "Oh yeah, well, you actually want to do it?" And he's like, "Oh, lead the FF? I don't know about that." But
Yeah, he's
then,
got big shoes to fill.
and he sleeps on it, and like, yeah, I think he can do it.
Well, and part of it is in that issue 304, he is hesitant when they're fighting Quicksilver, but then he's inevitably the one that comes up with the plan to defeat him.
Right.
And Reed reassures him that, hey, you made a good call. And I think that's sort of the turning point for him, where he realizes, I actually can do this. He's always had the ability to lead, but until you actually are put in a position of that, you don't really know if you can or if it's right for you.
Anyway, I think it's time that we moved on to the actual issues.
Okay.
We're going to start with issue number 269. The cover to this one is the classic frame cover that Marvel did for their 25th anniversary. Although their titles got this like portrait kind of cover where you see the heroes in the frame, and one of the stars from the book gets to be in the center. This one shows the Thing because he's coming back in this issue, and it's drawn by a ton of different people. We have everyone from Barry Windsor Smith doing the first 10 pages, which looks just fantastic. Ron Frenz, Al Milgram, John Buscema, Mark Silvestri, Jerry Ordway, they're all doing this here. So and a who's who of inkers as well. Vince Coletta, Klaus Janson, Steve Lealoha, Joe Rubenstein, Joe Sinnott. It's like, really great inkers there too. Mm-hmm. So this one is written, it's plotted by Jim Shooter, and it's actually scripted by Stan Lee, this issue. So that's kind of cool. And in this one, it starts off Ben coming back to town, and he goes into a flashback. So we get a little summary of the Fantastic Four's, like, issue number 1, their origin story.
I think it's a really good time to do that, especially right at the beginning of a volume that doesn't really. This is the first Fantastic Four epic collection that's out there, and so it's nice to have an origin story that's not actually an origin story.
Right. It's just a recap.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I mentioned this in the last episode as well. First of all, this is kind of a fill-in because John Byrne left, so they needed to take up some space. So they put the origin story in here. But also, this was an age where they didn't really do a whole lot of reprints. Like the comics weren't accessible online, of course, and you didn't have all of these long-running things like Marvel Masterworks. I think maybe had just been starting up at that point.
And you would, if they were going to reprint something, they'd reprint the earlier issues, like the first 100.
Well, and that's what I'm saying is it's nice to have these issues reprinted in the monthly series that are going to be on spinner racks, because if any kid's going to come and pick up a book from the 7-Eleven, it's nice to have these origin stories every once in a while for those who didn't know, who don't know what's going on or don't know these characters at all. So these sort of issues are actually necessary back in the day. Don't need to know them now. Anyway, tell us a little bit about, just very briefly, what happens in this big issue.
Well, what we have is the Thing, who is coming out of his own personal series. He had a solo series for a while, and at the end of that solo series, he starts to undergo this mutation further, and he believes himself to be becoming less human. So he decides to run off to Monster Island, or Monster Isle as it's sometimes called, which is where the Mole Man and his monsters live. We sort of see a little bit of a recap of this in this issue. So he goes off to Monster Island. The Fantastic Four have been wondering where he is. They've been looking for him. They come across the pilot who flew him there, who eventually spills the beans but says he doesn't want you to go look for him. And then, sure enough, they go and look for him. And then they visit the Mole Man and the Thing, and the Thing says, hey, Mole Man is just trying to get his people a home, but you know that there's going to be something like nefarious going on underneath.
Yeah. A couple of things that I really like about this issue is there's the scene where Reed calls the Fantastic Four to tell them that he's found Ben. He shoots a flare, and this mimics the very beginning of the Fantastic Four #1,
Right?
Where Sue goes invisible and has to go through the crowd and pushes people out of the way, and Johnny flames on in the middle of the street, and it is just very reminiscent.
And then he's wearing his brown suit.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. He's wearing his brown suit. Reed is. So that was kind of a nice nod, because this is the 25th anniversary issue of the Fantastic Four, but also of the Marvel Universe. It's nice that they threw that in there. One of the things about having so many artists in this book is that you get little inconsistencies. So I just noticed that the Thing is wearing these glasses,
The Mole Man glasses.
the Mole Man glasses, throughout the entire issue, because his eyes are now adjusted to being in the dark, and so when he's in the light, he needs to wear these special glasses. When the drawings the pages that Mark Silvestri does, he forgot to put the glasses on the Thing. So there's about 10 pages where he doesn't have the glasses, and then all of a sudden, when it switches over to Jerry Ordway, he's got the glasses again, and then he immediately takes off the glasses and smashes them or something like that. So, and you can see that on page 54, no glasses. Page 55, right, the very first panel, the glasses are back. So yeah, no editor spotted that mistake, I guess.
I didn't spot that.
One of the best conversations in this big issue is when She-Hulk is talking to Wyatt Wingfoot. Mm-hmm. They're a couple at this time, but she really feels like she's not part of the family. And you talked about how this is a family-driven book, and it's all about that. And even though she's been with the Fantastic Four for a while now, with about 2 years real time, she still feels like an outsider and feels like she hasn't quite fit in the same way that Ben fits in.
Yeah. And I think, she does eventually get there. But I think at this point in time, that has to do with the fact that there's so much other stuff, other family drama going on, with Ben having left. And actually, I wanted to mention this anyway because Ben's attitude in this, he's often kind of been down on himself, but in this particular issue, he really seems depressed.
He's hit rock bottom.
Rock bottom.
Pun intended.
Oh, yes. And the reason for this is, like I said, there's a lot that's happened in the last couple years. And if you look into that, then it's no wonder he's like this. After coming back from Battleworld, well, first of all, while he's on Battleworld, he falls in love with this lady named Tariana. And at the end of his time in Battleworld, Battleworld is going to be destroyed, and he has to leave her. And so he's just like lost this love of his life, who's going to die when Battleworld explodes. He comes back, and he kind of expects to, rejoin the team and
pick
maybe
up
with Alicia. Oddly enough, he was trying to break up with her right before he left, but hope to pick up with her. But she's now dating Johnny, and they're pretty soon to be engaged later on in one of these issues. So there's that. He's been replaced by She-Hulk, and it's he also finds out that Reed has known that his transformation is a psychological issue in Comic Times about a couple months, and never told him. And so all of these things sort of are compounding, which leads him to quit the Fantastic Four and distance himself. That's when he goes into the wrestling, and that's when he begins to mutate. And then so the mutation and the fact that Sharon Ventura only really likes him because he's not really human, that all really compounds to sort of set him up for his depressive state in this issue.
Right. Yeah, well, and not just this issue, but kind of the next 4 or 5 issues.
Right.
Which I think one of the things that Steve Englehart does really well is he gets him out of the funk.
Right.
By making him the leader and giving him something to take his mind off of all of that.
Yeah.
So, and we'll get to that in a little bit.
One thing I didn't know about this issue is that this is actually the first appearance of the Four Freedoms Plaza, which is their new headquarters.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
It was recently destroyed by...
Well, the Baxter Building was destroyed.
Well, the Baxter Building was destroyed. Their headquarters was destroyed by Christophe Bernard, who is Dr. Doom's adoptive son. We'll talk about him later as well.
Yep.
You know, there's all these things that are going on that that sort of come up, and some of them are addressed, but we'll talk about them more later. But yeah, and so over the last few issues leading up to this volume, Mr. Fantastic has been designing this new, bigger building, and you see it being constructed, but this is exactly the first time that you actually see it completed.
Like with the 4 design on the top.
With the 4 design on the top, yeah. One thing I didn't know, but through research for this, I discovered is that it was named after Franklin Roosevelt's World War II speech, and the 4 freedoms are the freedom of speech, worship, and the freedom from want and fear.
Huh, there you go.
Yeah.
Let's move on to issue number 297. This one's called Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun. This one is kind of the first... This is the first one by Roger Stern in this transitional period. I feel like Roger is just kind of... He's just kind of tying up a lot of the plot lines that were started by John Byrne that Byrne didn't really get to finish. The wedding coming up being the biggest one of those plot lines. Yeah, this one I kind of bored with this issue and the next one.
It was a really weird story.
Yeah, so just really briefly, I guess on some other quadrant of the galaxy or the universe, this alien is siphoning power through a black hole or a wormhole from our sun.
Yes.
And rediscovers this, and is going to kill our sun, which means that we're all going to die.
Right.
And so he sets off to find out where the source of this power is coming from.
The reason he's siphoning it is because he and his brother are like at a huge civil war on this planet.
Right.
And it's powering his like special suit, kind of like an Iron Man suit kind of thing.
Yeah. And those bad guys are called Umbra and Jagger, or Jogger. 2 A's, Jogger.
Yeah.
And so Fantastic Four go to take out this satellite that's siphoning power. They do it. They don't have any clue about this civil war that's going on.
Right.
And but then through the course of whatever Reed does to stop this power, the 2 brothers are somehow swept up in this vortex, brought to our side of the universe, and
they're merged in one body.
They're merged into one body, and so we can talk about these 2 issues together, I think, because it's just one kind of 2-part story, and so they the guy, I guess, just attaches himself to the ship, comes back to Earth, and they have a big fight. There's not a whole lot more than that.
No, pretty unremarkable.
Yeah, and so we have some art here by John and Sal Buscema, they're brothers. I think that John did the layout and Sal kind of finished up the art.
Yeah. What I do appreciate is how each of the brothers had very different facial hair, and then when they are in the merged body, it has like all the facial hair together.
Yep. So you can tell that their distinct personalities are merged together.
Yeah. There in 298 there is one mention. Franklin mentions a wedding, and it's people might want to know that that's reference to the wedding of Crystal and Quicksilver in Fantastic Four 150.
Okay.
Yeah. Also in 297, the Thing is seen wearing a full bodysuit and a helmet.
Yeah.
And that helmet, this is the first appearance of that helmet. It's something that he later
it's not
on.
The first appearance.
No,
wasn't that? It was in like Fantastic Four number 2 was when he.
Oh,
got his,
sorry, you're right.
It's from his original
You're
costume,
right, yes.
which he gave up like after one issue because he looked.
Yeah, but so this is sort of the I guess maybe the first modern appearance of it.
Right.
And
it comes back from time to time.
It does. And later on in this one, he's even wondering if he should wear it more. But he does later on after Wolverine cuts his face up.
He needs to wear for actual protection.
Yeah.
It's always weird. It's like he's made of rock. He doesn't need a helmet. Like if you whack him with a crowbar, nothing's gonna happen. The helmet's gonna just be pointless.
Right. But it was mostly to hide his face.
So is this the issue where Johnny proposes?
No.
Or was that in the...
I made a note about that. Oh, sorry, yes. So 297 is where Johnny proposes, but we didn't realize it. We didn't remember it because it's such a fast thing. There's sort of like hey, you want to get married?
Right, and the unfortunate thing is Ben happens to be in earshot when it all happens.
Right.
So that just kind of further pushes him into a little bit of depression there.
Yeah, I would say he's still not fully recovered from the stuff from the previous issue.
Yeah, and he really feels it because he looks around and She-Hulk has Wyatt,
Right.
Johnny has Alicia, and Reed and Sue have each other and Franklin, and he is very much alone.
He's the seventh wheel.
Even though he's part of this family and he's returned, and I think there's a hope that he kind of gets to go back to the life he had before, being part of a family unit. It's obvious that things have changed, and he is definitely kind of the third, fourth, fifth, or sixth wheel here.
And it's one thing to know that your ex-girlfriend that you still love is dating somebody else, but then to hear that they're like engaged and going to be married, that's like that's very different.
Yeah, it's kind of like, oh, I guess this is actually for real.
Right.
Okay, we can move on to issue number 299. This one's called The Best Man, and that's a double meaning in this title because this issue deals with a couple of different themes. This is the issue where Johnny asks Ben to be the best man at his wedding. And of course, because of everything that's going on, Ben does not react favorably to the suggestion or to the invitation.
Of course.
Yeah, for sure. And so this issue deals with Ben. It's a real character building issue where Ben and She-Hulk kind of have a little sit down. And I think She-Hulk's a good person to talk to him in this case because she's also been mutated. Not in an ugly way like Ben, but in a way that makes her stand out and be a little bit different. So they have a heart-to-heart.
But also she realizes that he really just needs to punch something.
Right.
And she can take it.
Yeah, and so she kind of goads him into it a little bit to lose his temper, and so they take it outside to an abandoned building and just go at it, and they have a great fight where the building just totally comes down. And it was just the kind of release that Ben needed in order to calm down a little bit.
The bar that they go to is called Al's Bar, and it actually reminds me a lot of Al's Diner from Reboot.
Oh, yeah. Well, Al's Bar is probably, I wonder if that's a
Milgram?
Reference to Al Milgram, yeah.
I thought it was really weird in this issue that they recap what happens 3 issues ago.
Yeah.
But that's probably part of the whole transition, kind of like, oh, we just need a little bit of filler here.
There's actually a lot of filler. It's not just what happened 3 issues ago, but there's going back to like Fantastic Four, I think number 7, where they first meet the Puppet Master. There's a recap there that takes up 2 pages. There's a recap of just kind of the battles he's had over time with Annihilus and Absorbing Man,
the wrestling.
There's a recap about the wrestling, which I think is probably the most helpful recap out of all of them here.
Yeah.
Just because it brings it up to speed and gives a little foreshadow of Miss Marvel, which Roger Stern didn't know that Miss Marvel was going to be used at the time. But
Right. And
it helps us out.
And they do mention the Thing's further mutation, but even in 296, where you see him with the Mole Man, he seems fine. And so he mentions that he's mutated, but there's no actual address of like how he stopped mutating or was cured of that or anything, which is very interesting.
Yeah. There's also a really nice scene between Human Torch and Spider-Man, who have had a great relationship over the years. Spider-Man in his black costume. Yeah, so the double meaning in the title is just not only just the best man, as in Johnny wants him to be the best man, but he's trying to figure out, the Thing himself is trying to figure out how to be a better man than he has been.
Yeah, especially considering all the things going on around him. Yeah.
Yeah, and he thinks that he can be the best out of all of the people in the Fantastic Four. Okay, number 300,
is a
Dearly
big
Beloved.
one.
This is the big issue here. And it starts off with Johnny at the Daily Bugle, mad at Robbie. At this period, Jonah is not in charge of the Bugle.
I was going to ask about that.
Thomas Fireheart has bought
the
the
Puma.
Bugle and
Yeah.
and ousted J. Jonah Jameson as
Right.
a favor to Spider-Man, in order to, because Spider-Man helped him out. So he,
Yes.
as a kind of to repay the debt, he is taking out a thorn in Spider-Man's side, which
Right.
is Jameson, who's always ragging on him. So Robbie is in charge. He's editor-in-chief here of the Daily Bugle. And they got a tip that Johnny and Alicia are going to be married, and so he prints it, and Johnny gets really mad. And I think that it's important because Johnny especially remembers Reed and Sue's wedding,
Yeah.
which all of the villains attacked in that wedding, so he doesn't want that to happen here.
Which is especially odd because out of all four of them, he's the one that's always wanted the most publicity.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, the hot shot. So overall, this is kind of a neat issue. I always appreciate the wedding issues. It's hard to do these well, because there's like, you don't want to make it too sweet and sappy, and
Right.
like it's still a comic book. So do we want action in there? And but do you want it to be an uninterrupted wedding, or do you want all this drama?
Yeah. And you think of some of the big weddings, like this one, like Lois and Clark, like
Peter and Mary Jane.
Peter, Mary Jane. And they're really well done.
Yeah. Well, and I think in terms of history, this.
Scott and Jean as well.
Oh, yeah, of course. In terms of history, this wedding is always forgotten because Johnny and Alicia are just not fated to be together.
Right.
That couple
they're not famous enough.
I really like this issue because there's a little bit of closure for Ben. He has a good conversation with Alicia and, kind of says his goodbyes. I thought it was really touching and a really great way to kind of, for Ben to let go. Unfortunately, Steve, when he starts writing the book, doesn't let it go at all. So he just kind of keeps on beating himself up about it.
he handles it well. Steve writes it, I think, really well. But
it came after this issue where he has a really good kind of, he gets some closure in there.
Yeah, but at the same time, it is brought back up even before Steve takes over, I think. Because when did he take over? 304?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
Yeah, but in even the next couple issues and in the Fantastic Four X-Men crossover, you see some of these same types of feelings and comments coming up from Ben.
Right.
Yeah, like it is important for closure, but it does still take a while even after closure for that sort of healing process to continue and
Right.
to like be okay to hang around them and stuff like that. He visits the Yancey Street gang here.
Oh,
Or
yeah.
rather, he visits Yancey Street, and the Yancey Street gang visits him. And what's interesting is they have this rivalry going on. Ben Grimm grew up on Yancey Street and was part of the Yancey Street gang, and he quit. And so they've always sort of bugged him, especially after he became famous. They bugged him about this. And so they always play pranks on him. But this time they actually do something really nice for him, because as much as they like to play pranks on him and bug him, they actually really like him.
Yeah, and Doom does the same thing too.
Yeah.
He, not that he really likes them, but he sends them.
respects Reed
sends them flowers,
sometimes.
and as a sign of a truce,
Yeah.
he says, "Until these flowers wither and die, I
Which is
won't
like
bother you guys."
3 days.
Yeah, exactly. But it's just a nice sentiment.
Yeah.
So, Doom is he's a classy guy, even though he's a maniacal, evil overlord.
Also in this one, we see the Puppet Master and the Mad Thinker team up, it's not the first time that's happened, but they actually team up quite a bit over the years, which is kind of an interesting pairing. You would think that someone like the Mad Thinker wouldn't need the help of somebody like the Puppet Master, because he's so much smarter. And you wouldn't think that the Puppet Master would want to team up with somebody who is so arrogant and condescending, just because of his own personality, but they do.
Right. The Mad Thinker it's revealed that he's a robot it's just an android version of
Yeah,
himself.
he's actually
here.
in jail, and he stays in jail for a long time, which is a smart thing on his part.
Yeah.
But he somehow has learned how to transfer his mind by thinking really hard about it, across great distances into these robot bodies.
And if he can do that, if he's building all of these robots, then why does he need the Puppet Master?
Yeah, exactly. Right. There's also mention of, quote, Brian and the Boys for a concert, which I believe would be a reference to Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys.
Oh, yeah.
I think so.
Probably.
And then there's, who's the artist on this one? Is that
It's still John and
still
Sal.
John and Sal.
Yep.
There's one panel where the puppet master has controlled Franklin to find out where the wedding is taking place. And there's just this one panel of Franklin with this really evil look on his face. And the next panel is the puppet master with a very similar evil look. And I just think that it's great because you're like, oh, this clearly is not Franklin in control here. This is very clearly the puppet master is controlling him.
Right. Okay, we're going to move on to issue number 301. This one's called Dark Dreams. This is a Roger Stern plot with Tom DeFalco script. With art by John and Sal. This one is really about Franklin. Mad Thinker teams up with the Wizard in order to try and attack the Fantastic Four by kidnapping Franklin and Ben. He gets both of them. But then Franklin has this new power that he's discovered, where he can, when he's asleep, his essence, I guess, can travel outside of his body, and he can travel to places.
Yeah. So Franklin Richards is a mutant. He was born with powers, and his powers are reality warping psionic abilities. Basically, like if he thinks it, it will happen, or it can become real. Now, normally mutants, their powers don't emerge until adolescence, but they were in the negative zone, and Annihilus awoke his mutant abilities, and it granted Franklin like full use of all of his powers, essentially making him like a cosmic being.
Not all of his powers.
Well,
just some of them, and more are revealed over time.
Yeah. But eventually he becomes too powerful, and after a talk with Reed, he realizes that he shouldn't have these abilities because he's not old enough to like use them properly, and so he uses his own powers to put like mental blocks in so that he cannot use his powers. And it's at this point here in issue 301 that they're starting to sort of break down, and his powers are sort of starting to leak through. So he gets visions of the future in his dreams, and he also can like psychically project himself to wherever he wants.
And these powers are developed in Power Pack.
Yeah.
This is where they come out. And so Franklin spends a lot of time with Power Pack to the point where he has these powers and Reed and Sue don't even know anything about them.
And so it's in this issue here that we first find that Reed and Sue first find out about them.
About his
projection.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it just goes to show how powerful he really is. Like Doctor Strange, those types of people, they can have their little astral projections, Professor X as well, but you always see them sort of start from their body and travel to a place. And Franklin just appears there, and it's not like just in the same city. This is across, the galaxy.
Yeah. You have anything more you want to say about that issue?
Yeah, there's a really interesting interaction between the Mad Thinker and the Wizard, in which the Wizard said he doesn't care about who gets hurt. The only thing that matters is revenge. And the Mad Thinker's like, okay, well, I won't hurt a child, therefore we're not working together anymore. But then the Wizard goes and creates a knockout gas that's strong enough to knock out the Thing, but not harm Franklin. Now, first of all, how did he know that they were going to be together? Like, why would you make a gas that has that, it's not going to hurt the child? Well, if you're intending it for the Thing, then you'd probably use it when the Thing's alone. You wouldn't necessarily anticipate that he's going to be with a child.
Right.
But then second of all, it's like, well, you just got finished saying you don't care who gets hurt. You want to get the Fantastic Four, yet you went through the trouble to make the gas not hurt the child. And that's the interesting thing is that, or one of the interesting things is that with the Mad Thinker not wanting to hurt a child, that's something you don't normally see in the villains. They may not want to hurt the children, but they won't necessarily actually like flat out say it. I'm not going to hurt children. It's something that you only really see in, say, like Flash's rogues. This is kind of a game to us. We know that there are rules. We're going to follow our moral code. And it's just, we're going to fight the hero and steal things, and like that's it. And so that and so it's interesting to hear the Mad Thinkers say, I've got my own moral code. I can attack them, but I'm not going to hurt the kid.
Right. This is also the first issue with no She-Hulk. She's out of the team, and the thing I remember when I read this a long time ago, and still with this volume, there's no goodbye for She-Hulk.
Right.
She is just out of there. Mm-hmm. It's like there's no, hey, thanks for helping out while Ben was gone, or no contemplating. Oh, I guess I need to leave because Ben's around. In fact, Wyatt is in this issue. He's still living there or something, reading a magazine. So is She-Hulk still there? I don't know. Maybe.
I wonder if they address that in an Avengers issue or something.
They must, because she does go from here to the Avengers. But it's not in this volume, and I haven't read that Avengers issue if it exists. So she's just kind of... It was just weird that she's just not there anymore. Okay.
It's also interesting that that the wizard, when Sue questions the wizard about where Franklin is, he said, he's beyond even your help now. And, you get the sense that he's trying to imply that that he's dead, which is definitely not the case. But I think that really what he's doing is referring to the magnitude of Franklin's powers. And because, he knows through the issue, he sort of discovered a little bit about what Franklin does and what he can do. And I think he's sort of saying, like, well, he's going to be a handful and you don't even know the half of it.
Let's move on to issue 302. Do you want to introduce this one?
Yeah, this one is Johnny and Alicia's honeymoon. And they go away to, and I don't remember exactly where it is here, upstate New York.
The most romantic place on earth.
That's right. And they're just going to go away to a friend's cabin in a little town in the countryside and just enjoy their time there. And on their way, they get stopped by a military blockade. And Johnny sort of freaks out about it because it's interrupting his honeymoon. Don't you know who I am and all that. And then they let him through. And then when they get to the town, they find out that people have been mysteriously vanishing, and then they'll show up like weeks later, and they don't know where they've been, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's kind of a nice, just a mystery issue. It's obviously another fill-in. It doesn't really have any repercussions anywhere.
Well, that's true, but at the same time, going along with the Fantastic Four theme of developing relationships and showing the interactions that they have, it makes sense. As a Fantastic Four comic, it is definitely out of place a little bit because it doesn't have a lot of the same science and adventure because Reed's not there and that kind of thing. But I think it definitely fits the general feel of a Fantastic Four comic.
Right. Well, yeah. And it's still by Stern and with a script by DeFalco, so it's the same as the last issue.
Right.
The editor for this part is Don Daly, and I'm pretty sure that he probably had Steve Englehart lined up by now. And Roger Stern has been writing Avengers all of this time, so with just providing the plots for these last few issues, and even he isn't even on next issue. So pretty sure that they're just biding their time right now, waiting for Steve Englehart's run to start.
I thought this was a strange issue in the way that it was written, in that it seems to have like this whole nuclear commentary, political kind of thing going on. But also, toward the end especially, it's got this sort of anti-cult feel.
Something that Craig pointed out when I was talking about Thor, which that takes place kind of at the same time here, is that the Chernobyl event just happened just before this book came out.
Right.
So the whole nuclear issue was very, very present in people's minds at this time. Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, kind of just a whatever kind of issue.
Yeah, although it does have some classic Human Torch poses, which I actually haven't seen a lot of in this collection. The ones where he's like standing, legs spread, and he's like has his hands together, blasting something.
Right. Well, and because Torch hasn't really been featured that heavily in the book so far. It's really just kind of focused on the Thing.
Yeah, this is very much the development of the Thing, coming out of his funk from all of the bad things that have happened in his life recently and getting him back to sort of a normal.
Yeah, which is surprising. Even though the Torch gets married, the Torch hasn't been a focus in a lot of these issues.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we get a Torch-specific issue, which is nice, but it's kind of just a lackluster issue.
Yeah, but that's why I like this, or I think this is a good collection, because it actually sort of takes us from the beginning of Things Funk to the end of it.
Yeah. The next issue, 303, is called Alternatives, and this is another just a fill-in. This is the very last issue before Steve's run starts, and they brought back Roy Thomas, who wrote Fantastic Four after Stan Lee left. So he was the guy that took over FF, and this is his. At the very end of this issue, it says, "Thanks from Roy T. to Don D. That's Don Daly and John Buscema for giving me another crack at the big fella." So this was kind of his last time on FF, and it's like a what if tale.
Yeah. Basically, we have Thundra, who is a sort of an Amazon warrior from a distant future where women are in control and have basically eliminated all men except for some maybe servants or something. They have no need for men. Their science is advanced. They can reproduce without needing men.
Is she basically Wonder Woman?
Yeah, kind of, except angrier. So basically, she has visited in the past. They had a little scuffle, and she deems Thing as she says in this issue, someone that she can respect as being almost her equal.
And probably for the same reason that Miss Marvel appreciates Thing, is because he doesn't even look like a man, so she doesn't consider him to be.
Well, not even that. Like she's very aware that he's a man. In this issue, she says that she needs needs. She's supposed to have a king who is definitely not over her in position, but apparently she's supposed to have one as she takes control of her people. But it's more of he's on par with her in terms of strength and ability.
Yeah. So this is another one of those issues where I thought Thing kind of let things go, and he was okay with his life in that previous issue, in the wedding issue, and then it comes back and it's like now we're talking about it again.
Yeah. But yeah, I think this shows that, he's not really over Alicia. It's like I said earlier, he has addressed it to her, saying, I'm okay with you being married to him, but that doesn't remove the actual hurt and doesn't mean that he has moved on yet. And so this is where we're seeing this. The Thing is trying to move on because Thundra asks him to marry her, and he's actually willing to do it, but then both he and she sort of realize that he's still hung up on Alicia.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a bizarre story. It's one of those Deus Ex Machina ones where, they just happen to have this technology that will allow him to go and fix this.
Right.
Yeah. Very strange.
Yeah. Yeah. So this kind of concludes the first half of this volume, and it just feels like it's like I appreciate the whole kind of arc that the Thing's going through, but we've really had kind of just fill-in after fill-in. It really does feel like they're, like James said, they're treading water until someone actually with an actual vision is coming along.
And had there been somebody with a vision, like had they gotten Steve Englehart earlier, it's very possible that they would have done something very similar with the Thing, but the overall story would be progressing a lot faster or in a more coherent manner.
Yeah, definitely. So the next issue is 304, which is the beginning of Steve Englehart's run. Now, this collection puts 304 right here, and then it skips to the Fantastic Four versus X-Men 4-issue miniseries, and then goes back into Steve Englehart's run. And I understand the placement because the X-Men miniseries has to take place during a very specific part of FF. Alicia and Johnny are already married, and they've already had their honeymoon. But Reed and Sue haven't left yet. So it needs to take place, like they haven't even announced that they're going to leave yet. So it needs to take place during this particular issue. But for our purposes, I'd rather talk about Steve Englehart's run together.
Okay.
So rather than going to 304, let's just skip ahead and go to the Fantastic Four versus X-Men miniseries.
Okay.
And talk about that. Now, I'm just gonna play a little clip here because I got the chance to talk to John Bogdanove about this miniseries and his involvement in it and writing it.
What an awesome experience that was. I think it required a lot of fill-ins on Power Pack to do it, but Wheezy encouraged me to do it. Carl encouraged me to do it. Mike Carlin was the editor and Chris Claremont was the writer. How could I not do it?
Yeah. So did they ask you? They came to you?
No, they invited me. they invited me to do it, and it was amazing. First of all, I mean, it was my introduction to Mike Carlin, which shaped my career.
Yeah.
And it was Fantastic Four, which Power Pack aside, Fantastic Four is my favorite Marvel book. I touched on both sets of characters, the X-Men and the Fantastic Four, in the context of Power Pack.
Right.
But to get to work with Chris, and to get to work with Mike, and to get to work with both of those groups was irresistible. And Chris was, I mean, you know, Chris and the Simonsons are tight. They're Chris is part of the Simonson universe, or Simonson is part of their universe, or whatever. But they're part of that same group, and so they were pals. And Chris is such a wonderful writer, and it was really apparent early on in the run that he was writing for me. He'd obviously seen my Power Pack stuff, and you know, he knew that I do the sentimental stuff really well, and that this stuff with a lot of feeling, and that I really liked Ben Grimm, and so he was throwing stuff at me that was like designed for me, and that doesn't always happen. That's something peculiar about the Marvel method, is that sometimes the writer will write for the artist's strengths.
Right. Yeah.
And that's really what happened with Fantastic Four as the X-Men.
Right. I really appreciated his explanation of the Marvel process.
Right. Yeah.
Because I'd heard the term before and I didn't really know what it was, but like hearing that makes a lot of sense, and you can see the difference in comics these days.
For sure. Yeah, it's full script, and you can even see the difference when comparing to DC Comics of this era as well, because they did full script. They didn't do it this way.
But I think it allows more dynamic art in each page, because the artist can sort of decide what they want to do. Now, back then, it was very much still the blocky 6-panel page or something like that, and there wasn't a lot of deviation from that. Everything's still in boxes.
That depends on the artist.
Well, it depends on the artist, I guess. Yeah. But when the artist knows just what happens on the page and they can sort of draw whatever they want, it's very different from saying, in this panel, this is what happens, and then they have to draw that.
Right. Yeah, it gives a different meaning to penciler.
Yeah.
Because he's not just a penciler.
Yeah.
He is a storyteller. So when I say this guy's a great storyteller, he actually is in charge of the flow of the page.
Right.
So yeah, the writer will give him a rough breakdown of what happens on the page, but it's the artist is in charge of actually conveying how many panels it takes to tell that part of the story. So yeah, and John Bogdanove does a good job.
He really does.
So briefly, I mentioned that this miniseries spins pretty much directly out of Mutant Massacre. I mentioned that earlier. The Morlocks have been, a lot of them have been killed, and the Power Pack spent a lot of time with the Morlocks. They appear in a lot of the issues, and they make good friends with Leech and people, and so it also makes sense that Franklin is involved in this story too, because Franklin had a relationship with those.
Yeah. It also kind of makes sense because that they hang out with the Morlocks, because children just don't seem to pay attention to some of these things that adults are really concerned about, like appearance. So the Morlocks are all hidden because, they're ugly. They're the mutants that don't really fit in society because of their appearance.
Right.
And kids just don't think about that. They're just like, hey, these are people too.
The other thing to note is that Louise Simonson was writing Power Pack and X Factor, and I think New Mutants at this time as well. So, and majority of Mutant Massacre took place in those 3 books, as well as Chris Claremont's X-Men.
Right.
So you have a cohesive universe kind of within those little books there, which is why Power Pack shows up so much.
Right.
Because Louise Simonson is writing a few X books as well. So the biggest ramifications from Mutant Massacre, the biggest one as far as the X-Men is concerned, is that Kitty Pryde is stuck now in her in a permanent phasing state.
So kind of like how Cyclops had some brain damage when he fell out of the plane and he can't control his optic blasts. In this case, Kitty has been damaged somehow, such that she can't control her ability to phase. And I guess their explanation for her phasing is her molecules spread apart so they can go in between all the other molecules of whatever she's phasing through.
Yep.
And so now they're just spreading apart without any stopping.
Yeah, and they're just going further and further apart, and eventually she'll just disperse.
Right. And so they have her in a little glass bubble type thing to help contain her. But she can't talk because she's at the point where you can kind of see her, but her throat isn't solid enough to actually produce sound. I thought that the art in this was really good, especially the drawings of Kitty in her sort of ghost form.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of light-dark contrast that goes on, and the shading is really good too.
Yeah, it is. He does a good job. So we're going to kind of talk, we're not going to break this one down issue by issue, I don't think. We'll kind of talk about it as a whole. So the premise is that they reach out to Reed Richards to see if he can lend his scientific brain to help Kitty. He is in a state of kind of self-doubt because they've uncovered this journal that Reed wrote way back when he...
was in college.
When he was in college, and it reveals that he actually knew that the cosmic rays were going to hurt the FF and change them, and it was intentional that he sent them into space because he wanted to see what was going to happen.
Well, not just that he knew that it was going to change them.
But he designed
the ship to gather the cosmic rays.
Yeah, to allow the change.
Yeah, so it was very intentional. He wasn't going to tell them, but he was intentionally going to change them, and so he. The reasoning was you see this growth of the number of mutants and superhumans, and so he said, well, you need somebody to be the positive role model for them, so that they choose the side of good instead of the side of evil, and the Fantastic Four was going to be them, that role model, which oddly enough they do become kind of.
And so at that point, Reed says no, he's not going to help, and Dr. Doom steps in and says, well, I can help. And so the FF try to stop the X-Men from getting Doom to help them out and stuff. So they have a bunch of sort of fights. This is a classic, we're going to pair our heroes against each other kind of thing. This is probably one of the earlier instances of that. And it felt more natural than the typical, we think you're villains, so we're going to fight you. Oh, we had a misunderstanding, let's team up and fight the actual bad guy. It was a different sort of misunderstanding.
Yeah, definitely. I do think, however, though, that the characterization of Reed is a little off for this time. He definitely goes through, Reed and Sue. Reed definitely goes through these periods of sort of being detached and disinterested and focused on his science. He also does go through these periods of self-doubt, but he wasn't at that point in this era. I think that's pretty evident through the rest of this book.
Right.
And so it's odd that they would choose to put him in that position. I mean, that it makes the story go, right? But it seems like odd that they would put him back there for this miniseries.
Well, I think that's kind of why they had him find the journal, because that's kind of the catalyst for him withdrawing into his science.
Okay, I get it. Well, no, at the beginning he's withdrawn into his science even before that, because he outright dismisses Franklin so that he can work on his stuff. He tells Susan, "Hey, deal with the kids so I can keep working."
Yeah, he kind of is always like that.
No, not at this point, because at this point in the series, he has just come off of, hey, let's move our family away. Let's not do science. Let's move our family away to Connecticut to raise them. And then shortly after this, he does the same thing. Let's move away from the Fantastic Four in order to have a normal life and not do all this crazy stuff. And so he, like I said, he definitely does have these periods, but this was not one of them. It also puts him back as a pipe smoker, which he hasn't done in a while.
Yeah.
And it very much has an emphasis on Sue as the matron of the family, she's wearing her handkerchief and sorting through old boxes and sorting and cleaning, and she's the one who has to deal with the kid, sort of, right?
Right, yeah. We do get a hint of her power, though, toward the end here.
Right. And so I think Chris Claremont has sort of a good idea of what she can do, because previously she has been known as Invisible Girl, and all she could really do was turn invisible and make her own personal force field.
Right.
Very recently, in 85 somewhere, 1985, they fight Psycho Man. This is shortly after she lost the baby. And Psycho Man sort of plays on all of these emotions that she has, and that develops the malice personality.
Right.
They conquer it, but she recognizes that she sort of lost some of her innocence, and that's when she changes her name to Invisible Woman. Also, at that time, through that malice personality, she discovers that she has the ability to create force objects and force fields that are not around her, that are around other things or different shapes. And we don't really see that in this collection.
Right.
Except occasionally she does force fields around other people. She makes a little chair for Franklin to ride on or the Thing to sit in.
This is a very weird version of X-Men. If you're not familiar with X-Men and you're reading this, and you only really know like the movies or the cartoon, it's kind of bizarre. Magneto's the leader, and you have a very 80s kind of punk-looking X-Men.
And they're none of the regular characters that you would think because, first of all, a lot of them have gone to, the 5 core have gone to X Factor.
Yep.
Secondly, a lot of the well-known ones are injured from the Mutant Massacre.
Right.
And it's also a period of transition for that team in general, as we find out.
Right, and so like Psylocke she doesn't have her other body that
Right,
she eventually moves into.
She's still white and British. Yep.
Long Shot's there, and
Dazzler.
And Dazzler, yeah, they just pop up every once in a while. And
Yeah.
Havoc too, he's kind of a in and out kind of guy.
Yeah, so oddly enough, she treats Havoc like the new guy because he's sort of joining the team again. But Rogue has sort of been there around for a little while, and she's kind of like, I don't need your help. You're not on the team yet. I can handle this.
Right, but Havoc was on the team before.
Oh yeah,
like
no.
in the 70s, right? Yeah,
right. From Giant Size X-Men, but
Yeah.
he had been off the team for a while, and
Right.
he's coming back now because they're a little short-handed.
So this also spins out of Power Pack because we explore Franklin's powers a little bit more as well.
Right.
And Doctor Doom knows about Franklin. Doctor Doom kind of figures out a lot about Franklin through this miniseries, which plays ahead in the Fantastic Four annual that's coming up in this
Right.
collection too. I'm going to play a little clip about John talking about what it's like to draw all of these different characters all together, like so many different characters in one book.
Well, there was a saying in Marvel of those days: team books kill.
Yeah.
And there's something to that because I'm not able to treat characters as stock characters or action figures. In order to function at all, in order to draw them at all, I have to get into them and invest in them. And so the challenge with a team book is just so many people, so many feelings, so many characters, so many heads to get inside that in a very real sense it can be emotionally exhausting.
Yeah.
Because you're switching from, I guess I'm sort of method in the way I draw. You're switching from, Logan's state of mind to Franklin's state of mind, Kitty Pryde's state of mind, to Victor Von Doom's state of mind, to Ben Grimm's state of mind. And some are easier fits than others. Like I have no trouble snapping into Ben Grimm. I have no trouble snapping into Dr. Doom. I have no trouble snapping into Franklin. I have a little more trouble snapping into Logan in a very real way. I mean, I love the character, but it took me a while. It took me longer to get Wolverine.
Okay, there's a little bit of an Easter egg that I want to share in here. In the first issue, when Franklin wakes up from his nightmare right at the beginning, he's in his bedroom. Because this is the artist from Power Pack, we have the exact same bedroom that we see in Power Pack. And the Easter eggs here is you get to see Coffee, who is his little alien pony friend from Power Pack.
Kymelin?
The Kymelin, yep. And then we have Friday, which is their sentient ship that they fly around in, and a little throwback to the Thing series when he was a wrestler fighting in the arena.
Unlimited Fighting Class Federation, something like that?
Yep. And on his nightstand, he has a family picture from the Power family, as well as Fantastic Four with She-Hulk, and a picture of Jarvis, because he stayed with Jarvis while Reed and Sue were out. And a copy of the Saggy Baggy Elephant on his shelf, which
is addressed later on.
Later on, exactly. So there are a lot of, that's a little cool panel there. That's on page 263 for those of you who want to see it. The theme of this whole book is sort of self-doubt and self-worth.
Right.
And a lot of introspective existentialism, I guess.
Yeah, and Chris Claremont does a great job of writing this and explaining what all the characters are thinking and feeling at the time. Maybe a little bit too much. But sometimes it seems like maybe he's just inventing problems where there weren't any in order to get some drama.
Sometimes, like when Kitty tries to kill herself.
No, I kind of think that makes sense because she sees that they're all fighting over her and she's already sort of feeling like there's no hope. But some of the other stuff, like Johnny fires at Wolverine and Storm falls in the way, and all of a sudden he's like, oh man, my powers are so dangerous. I don't know if I can ever use them again. I hurt somebody and I didn't mean to, except they were fighting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. That was that did bum him out quite a bit.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, you've burned people in the past.
It just some things seemed like this is coming out of nowhere just to create drama.
Yeah. Well, and to a certain extent, that's kind of what has to happen when you have two hero teams fighting each other. Like, you're going to have to create that drama where there normally wouldn't be any.
Right, but I think the book did that. The book did that enough.
So in this issue, She-Hulk joins the FF for the battle.
Right.
She comes back and I think they even ask her, well, what are you doing here?
Yeah, a couple times they're sort of like, oh, you're coming along. She's like, yeah, I was there when it first happened. I'm just gonna see this through to the end. But she does make reference to the fact that she is an Avenger now.
Yeah. And that's the only way we know that she's not on the FF anymore, because she otherwise just disappears.
Yeah.
Another quick clip to play, since we didn't get any clips in the first half of this episode. Another quick clip is John Bogdanove talking about how Franklin Richards is pretty much his son.
I had a strong affinity for Franklin because very early on I started modeling him after Kal-El.
Oh yeah.
Franklin in the comic books is basically the way I drew him. He's basically a portrait of our son at that age. I felt pretty personal about Franklin, and also you have to understand that at that age, Kal-El was unusually articulate, and he'd pretty much charmed everybody in the business. He got verbal very early, so that by the time that Chris was writing Franklin for Fantastic Four versus the X-Men, I really think that he was writing a little of Kal-El in there.
Speaking of Easter eggs, I know as a teacher, a high school teacher, there are a lot of young people that won't get this because they actually haven't seen very many old movies. But Kitty sings a little song to herself about being 15 and maybe not even seeing 16.
Right.
And that's a reference to The Sound of Music. I am 16 going on 17.
Right.
Which you don't get. Like, it has little music notes, but you don't get that because you don't hear it. They mention Hammerstein. Like I said, a lot of younger people actually haven't seen Sound of Music.
That's a shame. It's a good one.
I know. Also, I really, really liked the relief of the bar staff when Ben leaves the bar after he's been drinking there all day.
Well, especially because we came off of that issue at 299 where She-Hulk and Ben start their fight in a bar.
Yeah, and this is a different bar, but I'm sure word got around.
Oh yeah. Well, and this is on Yancey Street as well. This Yancey Street bar. So they're well aware who the Thing is.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, now, one thing that kind of confused me, and maybe I haven't read enough Power Pack to know this, but how was Lockheed able to lick Franklin? Because he was in his ghost form for all of that. Is he able to solidify himself?
No, he's not. Maybe that's just a mistake.
Yeah.
Are you sure he was actually not there at the time?
Yes.
Is this at the end?
It's in issue 4 when he sort of first pops up again to Kitty. Lockheed's there, and Lockheed recognizes him and gives him a big lick. And then Franklin wipes all the gross stuff off his face.
Oh, yeah. And he smells them, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, I don't know, because he's not supposed to be solid. He's supposed to be an astral projection.
Right. He also, even as an astral projection, he can, like, sit down by the glass and, like, seemingly press himself up against the glass. But then you see, like, the hand is actually causing pressure on the glass.
Right, and if he were just an astral projection, he could go inside the glass.
Oh, yeah, he could.
Yeah, I don't know.
So it's like sometimes they remember that and sometimes they don't. So that's kind of interesting.
I'm not sure.
Yeah. My other question about the art is, why does everybody end up naked in this series at some point? Like,
Sex sells.
no, because right at the beginning, She-Hulk is trying to help a falling down building, and her clothes are basically gone by the end. There's one point where Human Torch is flying around, and he lands back in his in Alicia's apartment, but he's not wearing clothes, so he's just flying around naked. There's one
and
part
Kitty's
where,
naked the entire
well,
time
exactly,
in the tubes.
Yep. And that's sort of never addressed why, like, there's this, 6, 7, 8-year-old kid by this naked teenager girl.
Right.
And also, who was it? Rogue gets blasted, and
No, after she takes the thing's powers, she busts out of all of her clothes.
And yeah, exactly.
So
and
when
then
she goes back to normal, she's naked too.
Right, exactly. So that's kind of weird. And then also Magneto's daughter is mentioned. Magneto's daughter, Anya. And I don't know anything about her. Do we ever, learn more about her?
Yeah, I think she's just kind of in a couple issues or something and then never appears again.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's move on then and I guess track back a little bit in this volume to issue 304, the beginning of the Englehart run. I'm going to insert a little clip about Steve talking about how he came to be on the Fantastic Four.
Well, I did come back in the 80s. I didn't have anything scheduled when I came back. They they offered me the West Coast Avengers and the Vision Witch, and then later the Surfer. So the FF came up several years after I'd come back at that point. But, John Byrne had a long run on the FF, and after he left, they were sort of scouting around for some different way to go. And I know there was at least one writer. So like everything in those days, they just came to you and said, do you want to write the Fantastic Four? But rather than you will be writing it. But people didn't ask for assignments in those days. It was all run from the top down. So,
okay.
They came and said, we want you to do the FF. It's like, okay, sure.
Right. And one of the first things you did was take Reed and Sue out of the picture.
Yeah, well, I thought we were now at issue 303, 300 and something. And I really thought that things had gotten stale in that book. There's definitely a large contingent of people who feel that it ought to be Reed and Sue and Ben and Johnny all the time. Maybe because I'd written the Avengers and the West Coast Avengers and all that. I looked at it and I said, this book needs to be shaken up. I thought it had sort of gotten stale. Reed and Sue had been saying for years and years in the book, years and years, that they were going to drop out at some point and take care of their child. And I thought, okay, let's do that.
So the art here is still by John Buscema, but now we have inks by Joe Sinnott. And he is one of the best inkers. He was the inker back in the Stan and Jack days. And he does more than just ink. He really fleshes out all of the drawings for any penciler that he works with.
And he had to fill in all those Kirby dots.
Yeah, the Kirby crackle, yeah. But he really takes John Buscema's art, which has actually kind of been lackluster through this series, and really makes it great. You compare the splash page in issue 303, which is John Buscema art with Romeo Tanghal's inks, to the way Joe Sinnott treats the Thing, and it has a very classic Kirby kind of feel, or at least it has a John Buscema feel when John Buscema was doing the Fantastic Four in the early 70s. But by this time, and Englehart speaks a little bit about working with John Buscema. He's kind of he's past his prime. He's at the end of his career here, and he's just kind of calling it in a lot of the times. And so maybe I'll play a little clip of that as well.
At that point in time, he was pretty burnt out on doing superheroes. He wanted to do Conan. That's what he liked.
Yeah.
And this is just internal Marvel stuff, but when Kirby left, they needed another Kirby, and Stan chose John to be the guy.
Oh, yeah.
And so John, took over Kirby's books, and got a lot of, deserved, he was a great artist, but he also got a lot of publicity, pushing him as the new guy. So he became sort of entrenched with the upper levels of the totem pole at Marvel, shall we say. When Stan left, Roy took him over, and I think my first issue of the Avengers was by John, actually, but basically I hadn't really worked with John. I knew his brother a whole lot better than I knew him, and when I did meet him, he was kind of like kind of burnt out, if I may say. I mean,
Right.
there's a cover. This is going to be really for the super fans out there or whatever, but there's a cover of the Avengers that he did with Roy, somewhere around maybe number 80. I'm just guessing. I could be way off, but it's Quicksilver running away from the rest of the Avengers, and it's positioned at an angle. He's coming out at you with super speed, and you're looking at it in one of those Batman angly things. It's really a nice cover. The first cover that we did for the FF is Quicksilver running away from the Fantastic Four, and it's a much less interesting approach. It's just, it's straight on, it's squared off. It's like he's running out there.
That's Avengers number 75 that you're referencing.
Okay, good. There you go.
Yep.
If you look at those two covers, you can see that John had, he'd lost his enthusiasm for this kind of thing.
There are two things going on in this issue. The first thing is that Reed and Sue announce that they plan to step away from the Fantastic Four, and Reed wants Ben to be the leader. That's the first thing that's going on. The second thing is that Quicksilver shows up, and he's kind of not in the state that we've seen him in for a long time. He's acting like a villain. He kidnaps Alicia. He's going kind of crazy, and so the Fantastic Four have to step in to try and save Alicia.
So from the listener comments, James
Yeah.
said that he didn't like Quicksilver being portrayed as the villain, and that's fair to say if you're a fan of the Quicksilver character, but I thought that it actually fit Quicksilver's character very well. It follows logically from where he is at this point. And this is something that I think that Steve Englehart does very well, which is why he's very well suited for the Fantastic Four books. He says in the interview, he lets the characters speak to him. So he doesn't just say, this is what I want to do with the character. He says, well, here's where we're starting. This is what the character's doing in this issue. How would the character proceed? What would the character do next?
Right. So faced with the situation here is that Crystal has cheated on him, and so he wants to get back.
Right.
at
So
her.
yeah. So basically, what he's saying is, if Johnny had fought harder to keep her because they used to date, and it was pretty serious, and it was a messy breakup. But if he had fought harder for Crystal, he probably could have kept Crystal, which would let Quicksilver not have experienced this humiliation
Right.
and heartbreak. And so Quicksilver always being portrayed as a hot-headed, quick-to-anger, jealous, envious, self-absorbed, self-righteous, proud, pious character, all of those like negative aspects, with the burden of this emotional stress, he's snapped. He's often portrayed as mentally unstable, and this just sort of pushes him over the edge. He has like a psychotic break or a mental breakdown.
Later on in this run, I think it might be in the next volume, they blame this all on Maximus the Mad. That Maximus had a hold on Quicksilver's mind.
And that's one way out of it, but I don't like. It's something that actually does happen in real life. Is that people have these? That's the reason why we have innocent by reason of insanity in court cases, because people have these deep emotional stresses and do things that they wouldn't normally do, that are out of character.
Yeah.
And logically, they make sense to the person. And, if you look at it, you can kind of see how this tracks. But when you step back from it in sort of a sane, it looks really weird. So I think it actually fits him very well. It reminds me of also how he reacted just after the House of M and Decimation events.
Oh, yeah.
Because there he also blames himself for all the loss of all of those mutants. And he goes a little crazy trying to use Terrigen crystals to repower the mutants that have lost their powers.
Right.
And he actually goes insane.
And he's been a villain. He was a villain when we first started.
Right.
Way back in the 60s.
And he was kind of a reluctant villain for a while. Like he...
but still he's sort of has that moral fluidity.
Right.
That he can go either way. So it's not... I don't think it's out of character for him to slip back into this.
No.
So if Superman showed up and was acting like this,
right,
that would be out of character.
Right, because he's actually very mentally stable. But Quicksilver being not so mentally stable and morally a little ambiguous, then I think this is fine. I actually kind of liked it.
Yeah. Okay, we should keep moving on here.
Yeah. I just want to mention that it made me laugh. There is one place where Quicksilver runs away, and the sound effect is acceleration.
There are some cool sound effects through here, yeah.
Yeah, but there's also a great example, this issue, of how the Fantastic Four uses teamwork to quickly dispatch their foe so that they don't have to have a big, drawn-out battle. And it's the same kind of thing that we see in the 2005 Fantastic Four movie. A lot of people said, "Oh, the fight scene was so short. That's not really interesting." But the interesting part is, hey, they used science to figure out how we're going to stop it, and then it happens.
Well, and the real character moment is that Ben sort of figured out how to...
Right. I wanted to mention that 304 is where Steve Englehart actually fixes the dangling plot point of how the Thing's mutation stopped. There's one panel where he says, when he went to Monster Island, Mole Man stabilized his condition.
Well...
And so that's never addressed before.
But I thought that was addressed before
No,
in the issue. When Johnny mutates, he has that machine to reverse him.
Right, but the Thing never says that it was used on him. Also, you would think that if it reversed the Thing's mutation, that it would put him back to
Ben Grimm.
Ben Grimm. But yeah, it was never explicitly stated before.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to move on to issue 305. It's called All in the Family. This is the issue where this volume gets its title. And we have the Thing really contemplating whether or not he's going to take over the FF or not. And Crystal stops by. So here's where the story kind of starts, because Crystal comes to confront her husband. And we find out that it's kind of a weird situation for the Inhumans. She's not allowed to divorce because she's part of the royal family. So they have to work it out, even though you could call this an abusive relationship.
Yeah, I don't know if this is intentional and they've remembered this or not, but the same thing is happening right now with Black Bolt and Medusa. They are
in the current comics?
In the current comics, yeah, they're separated. They don't consider themselves to be married anymore, but they're not officially divorced. She still refers to him as husband, but she's also dating Johnny Storm.
Oh, Johnny Storm gets around.
Yeah, which is also weird because Medusa is Crystal's sister.
Awkward.
No, yeah, and they actually address that a bit in there.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's nice to see that they go back to the far history, even in the new comics.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to say about this one? It's kind of just a chance for Ben and Johnny to kind of work things out a little bit. Johnny accuses Ben of asking Crystal to join the FF just to make things awkward for him.
Which I think is fair.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it is actually kind of true.
Yeah, it may not have been I think she shows up and he just sort of off the cuff says, "Hey, you want to join the team?"
Yeah, because she was part of the team before.
Right, and it makes sense. But then, he sort of starts to wonder, subconsciously, was there something else there? Which there may have been.
Yeah. Right at the end of this issue, Dr. Doom shows up, and it leads us directly into Fantastic Four Giant Size Annual number 20.
They were all giant size back then.
Yep. Which is a story by Steve Englehart and with pencils by Paul Neary.
Victor Von Doom, originally back in the day, scarred his face by using a machine that had a flaw in it, but the machine's purpose was to try and contact the afterlife. He's always been obsessed with the afterlife and what happens after you die because his mother died, and he's always trying to contact her. That's what leads him into learning all the magic and the dark arts. So he tells us here that every year on the summer solstice, I believe it was, that he performs some sort of ritual to summon Mephisto to try and battle him for his mother's soul to bring her back to life. And he's always failed. And, well, he's going up against the devil, so. And so he realizes, I guess, after the Fantastic Four X-Men crossover, what Franklin's powers are. He has been researching them, and he decides that if he has Franklin on board, he can actually overpower Mephisto and get his mother back.
Yeah, that's pretty much it in a nutshell. And then there's the subplot of Christoph, who's being held in a holding cell in the Four Freedoms Plaza, who escapes.
Yeah. Now, it's explained a little bit in this issue, but Christoph Bernard is a very interesting character.
Yeah.
He was a child who was orphaned. Doom had been kicked out of his country. His mother was loyal to Doom and helped get him back into the country, but was killed for it. So to reward the woman's loyalty, he adopts Christoph as his son. but then Doom is supposedly killed, and that kicks into effect a backup protocol in his robot droids, his Doombots, and they overwrite Christoph's memories with Doom's memories, so that it's like Doom is still there.
Yeah.
And so Christoph believes he is Doom.
Because he is.
Because he is.
He actually is Doom.
And actually, that's addressed in this one. The Doombots are not able to tell the difference between the brain scans of Dr. Doom and the brain scans of Christoph.
Yeah.
So he's been held prisoner or captive, I guess, by the Fantastic Four in the hopes that they can find somebody who can undo this sort of brainwashing and return him to normal.
Yeah. There's also mention of Franklin's pocket universes in here. As another aspect of his powers.
Oh, I missed that.
They reference the pocket universes, which plays a huge role in the 90s, of course, because he creates a huge pocket world for all of the heroes like Fantastic Four and Avengers to go and win during the whole Onslaught and Heroes Were Born storyline.
Right. Yes, the big blue ball.
Yeah, the big blue ball. And I always thought that was something they pulled out for, like, they created that power for that miniseries, but it actually is something that stems back to here, the 80s.
There's a great line in here that I think really explains the Fantastic Four really well. Doom says, the narrator, the text box says, that Doom knows that although they are tenacious fighters, they are peaceful by nature, and their main concern in life revolves not around power, but around people. And you think about, like, the Avengers or the Justice League, and their positions are all about power. And you think about, like, the X-Men, and this is, I mentioned this before. You think about the X-Men, their main concern isn't about power or people necessarily, but it's about acceptance.
Acceptance and survival.
I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. But for the Fantastic Four, their main concern is people.
Good line.
Yep.
Let's tackle these last two issues together. It's kind of the Diablo storyline, issue 306 and 307.
Right.
And this is where the new Fantastic Four team sort of comes together. The Inhumans show up right at the beginning to take Crystal back to the moon, but Crystal says that she's going to stay. And
no, they come to take Quicksilver back, and Crystal was going to go back with them and decides not to.
Right. And then, purely coincidental, Miss Marvel rides into town on Captain America's motorcycle.
Because they've sort of been hanging out after the Thing series.
Yep. And that's the storyline where, well, she's raped by a group of men and has a lot of emotional and psychological issues as a result of that.
She had a few before, but this really just compounds them.
Yeah. So I'm going to play a clip of Steve talking about why he chose Crystal and Miss Marvel to be the two members of the team.
Well, Crystal was pretty obvious. I mean, she had been Johnny's girlfriend once upon a time. He had moved over to Alicia, but Alicia was never, it never seemed like a serious to-the-death romance between the two of them. And, I thought Johnny being confronted with a woman that he had been involved with back in the day, that again would lead to storyline possibilities. And she had a history with the FF, obviously, through the Inhumans and everything else. So, that was all good. And I had written her in Vision Witch. So Crystal had a history with me and with the Marvel Universe, and specifically with the FF. So, bam, she was in. The other one, I was looking around, there's an infinite number of people who could join the FF. And I was looking for somebody who wasn't so obvious. And I was intrigued, Ms. Marvel's backstory was that she had been raped. And I had this idea that hanging out with the Thing would be kind of a safety zone for her, would be something where she would be kind of a damaged refugee in a sense to,
right.
To come in. And he's so big and solid and trustworthy and all that. I thought, now that's an interesting dynamic. I didn't think about her turning into the Thing later on, but that concept came directly from the original concept, which was that the two of them might make an interesting story. And so now we had two men and two women, and that was a little different for the FF, and she was not a big star, so that was a little different for the FF. And again, just as a writer, I just saw that there were a lot of things I can do with that.
Yeah, I really like Steve Englehart as a writer for the Fantastic Four. Like I said, he understands the Fantastic Four, and in choosing Miss Marvel and Crystal, he is continuing on this this pattern and theme of family. He's bringing in people with pre-established relationships, and when you're brought into the Fantastic Four, you're not just brought into the team; you're brought into the family.
Yeah.
And so you have this close family bond and developing of these familial relationships. And I think he really understands that.
Yeah, and they work well together. So these two issues, I think there's one purpose that it serves. Diablo fights the Fantastic Four team with Reed and Sue, and in the next issue, Diablo fights the team without Reed and Sue. And so the first time they fight, Reed is able to give some his leadership and solve the issue and defeat Diablo his way. And then we get to see the Thing calling the shots and defeating Diablo his way. So we get to see right away that Ben Grimm is a capable leader.
Right. And I think it's important for the characterization that the Thing says, listen, Reed, if you're going away, you got to let me do this and not come, charging in to save the day if something's going on.
Yeah.
And we see that Reed is actually tempted by this. And he says, okay, Sue and Franklin, you're going to have to be patient with me. I've been leading a long time. This is going to be a little hard for me. And they're like, yeah, we understand.
Yeah, the interesting thing now is that the team is pretty much a team of powerhouse characters.
Yeah, I thought that was very interesting as well.
Yeah, you have just the sheer strength of Thing and Miss Marvel, and
the elemental control of Crystal and
Human Torch. And you don't have the intellectual anymore.
No.
You don't have the kind of defensive character like Sue.
Right.
She's offensive as well, but
right.
she's primarily at this point used in a defensive role.
Yeah, particularly now, but just in general, if you ever need defense, she's the one.
Yeah.
The Thing can stop in the way of projectiles, but, she can protect more.
Yeah. So it's a very different type of team, and it's really interesting to see the kind of threats that they face and the way that they get out in the future. So the next volume, whenever volume 18 comes out, that collects the rest of the Steve Englehart run, it'll be great to talk about that and see where these characters go.
Yeah, and you see Thing realizing the difference in the team that he's constructed when they're faced with Diablo without Reed or with Reed, and he sort of goes, "Oh, I wouldn't be able to do it that way."
Right.
I think it's interesting also that the Thing says that only Alicia and Sharon have been his true loves, but then, well, what about Tariana from Battle World that he spent a year with and was going to spend the rest of his life with?
So soon we forget.
Yes. He came back and instantly started moping about Alicia and forgot all about her.
And that's interesting because...
Well, she died as well.
Steve really gets into the details of Marvel history in his run, like really obscure things. So to forget something like that is kind of interesting. He must not have read Battle World.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that is all of the issues in this book here. We made it through, and I would say that my general opinion is that I like about half of it. There are some great arcs and such, but this really isn't the best Fantastic Four volume out there.
Yeah. As a whole, like I said, I think it's really good because it takes us on a complete run from the beginning of the Thing's depression through to the end. But within that, some of the stories fell pretty flat.
Yeah. I would say most of Roger Stern's issues are kind of throwaway. There are a few key moments, and especially the wedding and stuff like that, but ultimately they're kind of forgettable.
Yeah. Not to say that this whole volume is forgettable, because some very important things happen with Reed and Sue coming and going at different times, the formation of the new team, and the exploration of Franklin's powers.
Dr. Doom being kicked out of Latveria has big repercussions down the road, too.
Yeah, so there's some big milestones here, but then they just sort of get mixed in with this... the War World, aliens, and the honeymoon issue, and
Yeah. So, it's I can see why, like the premise of the Epic Collection line is to collect previously unrelated or unreleased material, and the reason this stuff has been unreleased is because most of it is kind of unmemorable. If they had a Fantastic Four complete collection by Steve Englehart, we would never ever see these Roger Stern issues. I'm pretty sure they would just never come to.
We'd have a John Byrne collection, and it'd go to the end of John Byrne's run. We'd have Steve Englehart collection, which would start, and then we wouldn't ever see the stuff in the middle.
We'd never see these ones in the middle. For that reason, these collections are great.
Yeah, and it's definitely fulfilling its purpose.
Yep, there we go. Well, thanks, Eric, for joining us today.
You're welcome.
I think the next Fantastic Four volume we're going to tackle is Into the Time Stream.
That's a good one.
Yeah, it's the famous beginning of Walter Simonson's run. It's volume 20, so we will check that out and see what happens to all of our beloved characters after a few years after All in the Family. Yeah, looking forward to that. Thanks.
Yeah, me too.